The Forest Fire. While the boy was still at his breakfast, he smelled a faint odor of smoke coming from the north. He turned and saw a tiny spiral, white as a mist, rise from a forest ridge, not from the one nearest him, but from the one beyond it. It looked strange to see smoke in the wild forest, but it might be that a mountain stock farm lay over yonder, and that the women were boiling their morning coffee. It was remarkable the way the smoke increased and spread. It could not come from a ranch, but perhaps there were charcoal kilns in the forest. The smoke increased every moment. Now it curled over the whole mountaintop. It was not possible that so much smoke could come from a charcoal kiln. There must be a conflagration of some sort, for many birds flew over to the nearest ridge, hawks, grouse, and other birds, who were so small that it was impossible to recognize them at such a distance, fled from the fire. The tiny white spiral of smoke grew to a thick white cloud, which rolled over the edge of the ridge and sank towards the valley. Sparks and flakes of soot shot up from the clouds, and here and there one could see a red flame in the smoke. A big fire was raging over there, but what was burning? Surely there was no large farm hidden in the forest. The source of such a fire must be more than a farm. Now the smoke came from not only the ridge, but from the valley below it, which the boy could not see, because the next ridge obstructed his view. Great clouds of smoke ascending. The forest itself was burning. It was difficult for him to grasp the idea that the fresh green pines could burn. If it really were the forest that was burning, perhaps the fire might spread all the way over to him. It seemed improbable, but he wished the eagle would soon return. It would be best to be away from this. The mere smell of the smoke which he drew in with every breath was a torture. All at once he heard a terrible crackling and spluttering. It came from the ridge nearest him. There on the highest point stood a tall pine like the one in which he sat. A moment before it had been gorgeous red in the morning light. Now all the needles flashed and the pine caught fire. Never before had it looked so beautiful, but this was the last time it would exhibit any beauty, for the pine was the first tree on the ridge to burn. It was impossible to tell how the flames had reached it. Had the fire flown on red wings or crawled along the ground like a snake? It was not easy to say, but there it was at all events. The great pine burned like a birch stem. Ah, look, now smoke curled up in many places on the ridge. The forest fire was both bird and snake. It could fly in the air over wide stretches or steal along the ground. The whole ridge was ablaze. There was a hasty flight of birds that circled up through the smoke like big flakes of soot. They flew across the valley and came to the ridge where the boy sat. A horned owl perched beside him, and on a branch just above him a hen hawk alighted. These would have been dangerous neighbors in any other time, but now they did not even glance in his direction, only stared at the fire. Probably they could not make out what was wrong with the forest. A marten ran up to the pine to the tip of the branch and looked at the burning heights. Close beside the marten sat a squirrel, but they did not appear to notice each other. Now the fire came rushing down the slope, hissing and roaring like a tornado. Through the smoke one could see the flames dart from tree to tree. Before a branch caught fire, it was first enveloped in a thin veil of smoke. Then all the needles grew red at one time, and it began to crackle and blaze. In the glen below ran a little brook, bordered by elms and small birches. It appeared as if the flames would halt there. Leafy trees are not so ready to take fire as fir trees. The fire did pause as if before a gate that could stop it. It glowed and crackled and tried to leap across the brook to the pine woods on the other sides, but it could not reach them. For a short time the fire was thus restrained. Then it shot a long flame over to the large dry pine that stood on the slope, and this was soon ablaze. The fire had crossed the brook. The heat was so intense that every tree on the mountain was ready to burn. With the roar and rush of the maddest storm and the wildest torrent, the forest fire flew over to the ridge. Then the hawk and the owl rose, and the marten dashed down the tree. In a few seconds more, the fire would reach the top of the pine, and the boy, too. would have been moving. It was not easy to slide down the long, straight pine trunk. He took a firm hold of it as he could, and slid in long stretches between the knotty branches. Finally, he tumbled headlong to the ground. He had no time to find out if he was hurt, only to hurry away. The fire raced down the pine like a raging tempest. The ground under his feet was hot and smoldering. On either side of him ran a lynx and an adder, and right beside the snake fluttered a mother grouse, who was hurrying along with her little downy chicks. When the refugees descended the mountain to the glen, they met people fighting the fire. They had been there for some time, but the boy had been gazing so intently in the direction of the fire that he had not noticed them before. In this glen there was a brook, bordered by a row of leafy trees, and back of these trees the people worked. They felled the fir trees nearest the elms, dipped water from the brook and poured it over the ground, washing away heather and myrtle to prevent the fire from stealing up to the birch brush. They, too, thought only of the fire which was now rushing towards them. The fleeing animals ran in and out among the men's feet, without attracting attention. No one struck at the adder or tried to catch the mother grouse as she ran back and forth with her little peeping birdlings. They did not even bother about Thimbletot. In their hands they held great charred pine branches, which they dropped into the brook, and it appeared as if they intended to challenge the fire with these weapons. There were not many men, and it was strange to see them stand there, ready to fight, when all other living creatures were fleeing. As the fire came roaring and rushing down the slope, with its intolerable heat and suffocating smoke, ready to hurl itself over brook and leaf tree wall in order to reach the opposite shore without having to pause, the people drew back as if first unable to withstand it, but they did not flee far before they turned back. The conflagration raged with savage force. Sparks poured like a rain of fire over the leaf trees, and long tongues of flame shot hissingly out from the smoke, as if the forest on the other side were sucking them in. But the leaf tree wall was an obstruction behind which the men worked. When the ground began to smolder, they brought water in their vessels and dampened it. When a tree became wreathed in smoke, they felled it at once, threw it down, and put out the flames. Where the fire crept along the heather, they beat it with wet pine branches and smothered it. The smoke was so dense that it enveloped everything. One could not possibly see how the battle was going, but it was easy enough to understand that it was a hard fight, and that several times the fires came near penetrating farther. But think, after a while the loud roar of flames decreased, and the smoke cleared. By that time the leaf trees had lost all their foliage. The ground under them was charred. The faces of the men were blackened by smoke and dripping with sweat. But the forest fire was conquered. It had ceased to flame up. Soft white smoke crept along the ground, and from it peeped out a lot of black stumps. This was all there was left of the beautiful forest. The boy scrambled up on a rock so that he might see how the fire had been quenched. But now the forest was saved, his peril began. The owl and the hawk simultaneously turned their eyes towards him. Just then he heard a familiar voice calling to him. Gorgo, the golden eagle, came sweeping through the forest, and soon the boy was soaring among the clouds, rescued from every peril.